Otherwise it could be worse than smoking cannabis. We will use this and gratefully, said Maomao. But I want you to tell us exactly how you got it. The little pot was full of opium. The problems continued to accumulate, and they turned out to be connected in the strangest ways. The guide said he had gotten the opium from a merchant traveling with a caravan of entertainers. The merchant had told him it would help what ailed him and help him forget the cares of this world. Perhaps if he had been a more thoughtful or more suspicious man, the guide might have figured out what the merchant meant by that. That is the line you use to sell cannabis. In the town where the guide was based, the stuff was dried and smoked. If they had been planning to use the opium in the same way, it was fortunate no one had explained how to use it. The man insisted he did not smoke himself. Smoking cannabis could be addictive, and if a cannabis addict began using opium as well. The idea was hardly worth considering. The final clue came from what the guide said when Maomao asked him to describe the merchant caravan. He said, I caught a glimpse, just a quick glimpse you see, but I saw her. There was a girl. The entertainers really seemed protective of her. She was a young girl, maybe just 15 years old. This had been roughly a year ago. She had white hair I've never seen the like, and I can't forget it. She was the incarnation of the serpent god, I'm sure of it, come secretly to Earth. This is the first time I have ever told anyone what I saw. We need hardly spell out what Maomao thought of when she heard about a woman with white hair. A year ago would place these events before that woman had come to the capital. Perhaps it was the man's naive faith in the woman that had caused him to take the opium at face value. He saw it as a painkiller and nothing more. He was truly a lucky man, Maomao reflected. There was reason enough to be grateful for the medicine, as it salved the pain of the injured men. Opium did not have a particularly long shelf life. Maomao had worried it might not be effective, but it proved otherwise. She felt sorry for the guide and his sincere beliefs, but she decided to requisition all the opium he had. She paid him well for the product, adding enough extra so he couldn't complain. As long as we are piling up problems, let us add one more. One of the bandits had a tattoo of a snake. The bands they all wore around their wrists had once been white and showed two snakes in coitus. However, despite attempts to get answers, the men were in no shape to tell them anything at all. All the bandits were opium addicts. Chapter 13, The Western Capital, Day 1. This swell of problems remained unresolved, but the good news was that they reached their destination without further complications. Jinchi was perhaps mindful of Duo and consort Lishu. She didn't even tease Maomao, who got to spend plenty of time with Suhari. They were both apothecaries, but they had learned under different masters. Because of this, they each had their own ways of mixing medicine, and it was fun to discover new approaches. Gradually, the green around them faded. It was replaced by an expansive vista of pebbles and sand. Maomao had never seen sand stretch out so far that it looked like water. She couldn't suppress a sound of amazement. She wrapped a cloth around her head to keep the sand from getting in her eyes. The sunlight reflecting off the ground could be blinding. However, when they made camp for the night, it was astonishingly cold. This was far beyond anything Maomao had imagined for this trip. She was grateful that whoever packed clothing for her had anticipated the situation. However, she felt a little conflicted that they had even packed underwear for her. They had been warned to be careful at night, when scorpions and poisonous snakes were most active. Suhari, with her phobia of such creatures, set up a veritable wall of bug and snake-repelling incense. Because of this, they hardly saw anything of the sort. Maomao was disappointed. Consort Lishu had an even harder time than she did. As a consort, she rarely appeared among the others. Her ladies-in-waiting were always close by, so the retiring young woman did not have many chances for proper conversation. The closest thing to a break was that Duo was kind enough to talk with her sometimes. Duo, how would she react if it turned out Lishu was actually the Emperor's child? His Majesty had not taken any other consorts while he was the heir apparent. Would Duke feel conflicted about that, or would she take it in stride? One thing was certain: it would change how people saw everything she had been doing. It would seem less like kindness and more like a plan. In fact, it would suggest she had known all along. Arg. I do not want to think about it. Of course, His Majesty would not lay and had not laid a hand on such a girlish young woman. Well, not just girlish but literally still a girl. But what then did that mean for Jinchi as a prospect? It was not unusual for powerful people to marry close relations. Nieces and aunts and even half-sisters had been admitted to the rear palace in the past. The problem was that if a bloodline became too thick, it could make all of its members vulnerable to a single disease. This disease might kill them all off. Maomao wondered if the mistakes of the former emperor's reign would be repeated. In any case, she breathed a sigh of relief when they arrived at the western capital. The city had grown up around an oasis, a precious resource in the desert. The sandy wind blew through streets that bustled with a life quite different from what one found near the emperor's palace. If the royal city was laid out with the straight, clean lines and intersections of a go board, the western capital appeared a far more chaotic place. Jinchi said, "I've heard about this. You can see how easy it would be to get lost here." It was the first time Maomao had heard his voice in quite a while. Ardu seemed to have guessed his identity, but the others still appeared unaware. Perhaps Suhari had figured it out too, but she remained silent. One can only imagine how Lishu would react if she discovered that the beautiful prince had been her traveling companion the entire time. Would she consider him a possible husband, or perhaps see him as a half-brother or even an uncle? Jinchi had finally healed the burn on his cheek. He had worn makeup to cover it for nearly a month, and it had left a slight stain, which he now rubbed at self-consciously. The other important officials and messengers from various nations had already arrived. The western capital had a festive atmosphere. A market was set up, and the sound of firecrackers filled the air. Awnings were stretched out between milky white walls and dusty red roof tiles to block the sun. At the butcher's stall, we saw not only chicken, but sheep as well. Maomao was nearly distracted by the heavily herbed dishes being served at the street stalls. However, the party continued resolutely toward a mansion by the water source. The building materials of the house wood, and plenty of it spoke to the power of the house's owner. The closeness to the water meant there was plenty of greenery. It wasn't much like the broad-leaved plants Maomao was used to, but she saw a variety of unfamiliar plant life. A gentle-looking middle-aged master and several servants were waiting for them in front of a magnificent gate. First Jinchi, then Ardu climbed out of the carriage. Jinchi's appearance inspired a great many wide eyes, even among his own party, so they really hadn't known it was him. Standing before them was a radiant and lovely noble. Maomao found herself taken in by the man's face. The kindly look in his eyes invited a sense of intimacy. "Welcome, welcome. You have made a long journey. I am Ujiakuan, the leader of this land." He acted awfully familiar, but he seemed to be approaching them in good faith. "I must thank you for taking such fine care of my daughter." Maomao finally understood who the middle-aged man was and why he seemed so familiar. His hair and eyes were dark, but his attitude was very much Gyokai's. He said, "Nothing is worse than a very long trip followed by a very long talk." He continued, "You will find bathing supplies in your rooms. Please take your time and relax. Now that's a relief." "Thank you," Jinchi said and entered the house. Maomao followed after him. Was she sure about this? Maomao thought, shocked when she saw the room she had been assigned. Of course, she was there as a servant of the emperor's younger brother, so they could hardly stick her in some dusty corner. But the room they led her to was far beyond her station. A thick, luxurious carpet covered the floor. It felt like more than just fur. Silk or something similar was mixed in. The canopied bed had a delicately embroidered curtain. A glass cup with a silver handle was set on the table. There was a basket of dried jujubes. The whole thing looked like something from a picture scroll of a foreign fantasy. Will they steal our money later? Maomao thought idly as she bit into one of the fruits. Without water in the flesh, the sweetness was more concentrated. It was good, but a little too sweet for Maomao, so she decided to stop at just one. She would have liked to explore the mansion, but she thought someone might get angry at her for wandering around without permission. For today at least they would each eat separately and get some rest. Starting tomorrow, there would be several days of banquets and dinner parties. The afternoons would be filled with meetings and business. Important people sometimes seem to want to celebrate every little thing with a big party, regardless of how tired the guests might be feeling. But like his daughter, Jiaqian was too alert and thoughtful to do that to his visitors. Maomao was particularly grateful that he had even prepared a bath for them, given that water must have been among the most precious things here. She found the tub, carved from a single massive piece of marble, a little intimidating. She got out of the bath and went out on the balcony. Her hair seemed likely to dry quickly. However, out here she would get covered in dust again, so she made to go back inside. Then the sound of talking voices brought her up short. She looked around, but she saw no one. The voices seemed to be coming from the next room. Well, were they not going to keep it down? There was no point in the room's deliberately thick walls if they were simply going to leave the windows open. She could hear everything. She leaned against the railing and then leaned out over it a little further. There was peeping and then more peeping. "What are you doing here?" It was a woman's voice, still young. The next room belonged to Consort Lishu, but the voice wasn't hers. Next, someone mumbled something so softly that Maomao could not quite hear it. Perhaps it was Lishu. "Oh, really? And so what? You just want to get in my way. You are always in my way." The woman was clearly upset with Lishu. Maomao was actually glad to hear someone being openly hostile for once. But the words were followed by the sound of a slap. Maomao went back into her room and then peeked out into the hallway. From next door, a woman emerged who practically oozed elegance. She hid her mouth with a folding fan, but her nose was distinctly held high in the air. The ladies in waiting attending outside bowed to her. 2 of them followed the young lady, and the last one went into the room. Tossing everyone out so the 2 women could have their fight was well and good, but perhaps Maomao should advise the young lady to close the windows next time too. When she was sure that the unfamiliar woman had disappeared around the next corner, Maomao went and knocked on the door of Lishu's room. The lady in waiting answered the call, looking relieved when she saw it wasn't the young woman returning for more. "Might I come in?" Maomao asked loudly enough for Lishu to hear her. The lady in waiting quickly moved into the room and soon came back. "Please enter," she said. Maomao knew that Lishu's usual chief lady in waiting was not with her on this trip. The replacement seemed rather businesslike. Consort Lishu was sitting in a chair when Maomao entered. From the disheveled state of the blankets on the bed, Maomao guessed the young consort had tried to bury herself under the covers after that unpleasant encounter. The pillow had small wet spots and Lishu's hair was a little messy. She didn't quite look at Maomao. It wasn't that she didn't want to make eye contact, but she seemed to be trying to hide the slap mark on her cheek. The mark looked red and hot. "May I see it?" Maomao asked. Lishu didn't say anything, but when she realized Maomao was perfectly aware of what had happened, she obediently raised her head. "Perhaps you could fetch some water for us," Maomao said to the businesslike lady in waiting. The woman gave her a frankly mistrustful look. Maomao decided to give her a little push. "Gracious, you were so ready to leave the room for the last visitor." That got the woman going. Maomao stood in front of Lishu and took her chin in her hands. Her cheek was warm, but it would cool soon. "May I see the inside of your mouth, just in case?" Lishu looked a little embarrassed. She opened her mouth as Maomao asked. Her pretty white teeth were all safe. There did not appear to be any cuts on her cheeks or tongue. "But what is this?" Maomao, intrigued, stared fixedly into the young woman's mouth. Lishu started getting more and more awkward. Finally, Maomao felt bad enough about it to stop looking. "It seems you had a rather violent visitor." "May I ask who that was?" Maomao said. "It was my half-sister," Lishu replied. After the death of Lishu's mother, her father Aryu had swiftly taken another wife. He had previously shared his life with this woman as a concubine, and Lishu already had half-siblings. The young woman he had spoken with earlier was one of them, an older sister. Lishu's parents were second cousins. Similar to the Shi clan, Lishu's mother belonged to the main house of the Yu clan. They had then adopted her father. What set the Shi clan apart was how they treated Lishu, the daughter of Aryu's legitimate wife. Lishu's maternal grandparents had passed away, giving Aryu complete authority. He doubted his wife's faithfulness and consequently often overlooked Lishu. Maomao considered this a small matter, especially since he already had children with a concubine. If she truly was the emperor's secret child, wouldn't her father have seen that as an advantage? It would be something to exploit on its own. Also, to all appearances, he favored Li Shu's older sister. All those questions about parents and children. Were they perhaps inspired by your honorable elder sister? Maomao asked. Li Shu did not respond, but Maomao took her silence as affirmation. And was the reason you refused to quite finish your thought about those bandits because you had a certain guess about who was behind it? Maom did not want to think about it, but it was not outside the realm of possibility that an older sister might grow jealous of a younger one and try to have her assassinated. This time Li Shu reacted. I'm afraid I just don't know. Her expression, though, at least conveyed that she had been the subject of considerable cruelty. They were going to eat individually this evening, so Maomao had an idea. Might I dine with you tonight, milady? Perhaps we could ask Lady Arduo to join us. At Arduo's name, Li Shu's face broke into a glow. Maomao fully expected Arduo would accept the request. This would give her a good excuse to check Li Shu's food for poison. Someone who was willing to send bandit assassins certainly wouldn't hesitate to stoop to poisoning a meal. Maomao didn't know whose child Li Shu might really be, but whoever it was no fault of her own. The thought made her feel sorry for the young woman. Yes, even Maomao had at least that much compassion. Arduo gladly accepted their invitation to dinner. She asked for all of their meals to be delivered to one place. The chef thoughtfully prepared a room for them. It had a domed ceiling of coloured glass. This glass had presumably been acquired from places farther west. When the light hit it, it glowed like a jewel. Quite a place, Arduo said, stroking her chin and nodding knowingly. Consort Li Shu's eyes glowed almost as brightly as the glass. Maomao meanwhile wondered what they had done to the glass to give it those colours. You're sure it's all right for us to use it? Arduo asked the chef, who smiled. The young mistress used to eat with her friends here all the time, but it's gone almost unused in recent years. Could he mean Empress Jayakayo? The entire structure was moved here from another land, where it originally served as a place of worship for their deity. You are more than welcome here as long as that does not bother you. Naturally, you will not run into any worshippers, though. Fair enough, it did feel a little strange. This country did not have a policy of expunging heretics, but Maomao would not have wanted to be pressed to convert. It doesn't bother me, Arduo said. If Lady Arduo accepts it, then certainly. How did they make that glass? Pleased to see there would be no fuss, the chef ordered a server to begin setting places for dinner. The room was scrupulously cleaned. He ran a finger along the surfaces to check for dust, as if he were a mean-spirited mother-in-law. He found nothing left behind. Arduo reported that she had invited Suhari, but the woman had declined the invitation. Arduo seemed oddly fond of Suhari. However, there was one strange aspect to the meal. With 4 of them present, it almost felt like a 2-on-2 matchmaking meeting, even though they were all women. Maomao felt like a shadow. Some hidden figure was watching them wistfully from across the hallway. She chose to ignore it. Instead, the 3 of them enjoyed the exotic atmosphere and the delicious meal. I'll be happy to clean up here, Maomao said. The meal was over, and she decided to send Arduo and consort Li Shu back first. Arduo's room was diagonally across from Li Shu's, so she was confident they wouldn't have any trouble with the consort's bullying elder sister. I'll help, Arduo offered. No, thank you, ma'am. I simply intended to call a server. Arduo had dismissed their waiter after the food arrived, because she wanted to sit and talk. However, it was mostly Arduo and Li Shu who were talking, with Maomao offering only occasional polite comments. They spoke of everything that had happened on the trip, shared memories, and remarked on how lively the city was. Ordinary conversation, to be sure, but Li Shu clearly enjoyed it. She smiled the entire time. Jayakayo's family house turned out to be quite large. Maomao found herself nearly lost trying to find the server. Pretty sure I should take a right here, she thought as she walked along. Then she sensed someone behind her. Each time she moved, she heard footsteps follow her. The footsteps stopped whenever she did. She turned around and discovered Basin looking at her awkwardly. She did not say anything. He did not say anything either. Finally she asked, "Is something the matter, sir?" "Oh, not at all," he replied. But he was a terrible liar and his eyes darted away tellingly. "Are you lost, sir? Who me?" No, Maomao found herself increasingly worried about whether Basin was going to survive as Jinchi's right-hand man. It was almost comical to watch him. Pressing the issue right now would only have been cruel, however, so she pretended to play along. "Since you are here, perhaps you could walk me to my room." It is quite a ways to the annex. Yes, I suppose it would only be chivalrous, Basin said. As Maomao recalled, his room was in the building next to hers. If she could get him that close, even he could not get lost going the rest of the way. What a lot of trouble he could be. Maomao was willing enough to help, but she wasn't going to entertain him with conversation as they went along, not if he was going to be such a bother. She had thought they might end up walking in silence, but Basin actually began a conversation. He asked, say, "Do you know what sort of person Consort Lishu is?" His words were punctuated by the tapping of their footsteps. She thought Master Jinshi would be better placed to answer that question than she was.